big news out of Dove Valley. The Broncos have their new head coach.
We have team coverage this morning. Our Broncos insider Troy Rank is on the line with us to break down the next steps for the franchise. Denver7 Sports anchor Nick Rothschild joins us from our newsroom this morning with details on the deal and the statement the Broncos are making with their new hire, Nathaniel Hackett.
All right, we're going to get to both them in just a moment. First, thank you for joining us on this Thursday. I'm Nicole Brady.
And I'm Brian Sanders. And we want to get right to our sports experts this morning. Nick, so far, what do we know about Nathaniel Hackett, the Packers offensive coordinator, coming over as the Broncos' new head coach?
Well, what do we know is that George Paton works on Eastern time, right? My alarm is going off. Usually I'd be getting up right now, and we're talking Broncos head coaching vacancy filled. So Nathaniel Hackett, what do we know? Offensive coordinator from the Green Bay Packers. He is the first offensive-minded coach that the Broncos are bringing in since Gary Kubiak, and the Broncos are going back to the well of the third straight coach that they have hired that hasn't had head coaching experience yet in their NFL career. Now, Hackett is not by any means new to coaching. He's been the offensive coordinator for Jacksonville and Green Bay in the last decade. He comes from coaching lineage. His dad, Paul Hackett, was a legendary coach at USC and other places. And the thing about Nathaniel Hackett, now listen, I am not our Broncos insider. That's Troy Rank. He's coming up next. But what I am is a lifelong Packers fan. So I am uniquely able to bring you a perspective that has been watching Nathaniel Hackett's work very closely for the last 3 years while he's been in Green Bay. And what Hackett is creative, he's high energy, and he's willing to be collaborative. And I think that's one thing that Vic Fangio didn't necessarily bring to this team over the last 3 years. He was so hyper-focused on the defense that the offense and the special teams seemed to fall to the wayside. Hackett is a true leader of men, and he's a guy that wants to be creative and collaborative in the entire football process. He has also had a great track record working with quarterbacks. And as we know here in Broncos country, the quarterback situation in Denver has been atrocious ever since Peyton Manning left. Hackett lifted Blake Bortles. Let me say that name again. Blake Bortles to an AFC championship game. And if he can do that, think about what he can do with a player the quality of Aaron Rodgers. We've seen that over the last 3 years, or at least a younger, talented guy that they may bring in this offseason. So while most of you may think that they're only hiring the Packers guy to get Aaron Rodgers, which right now we don't know what his situation is, let me tell you, Hackett was a guy who was going to be a head coach in this league following this season, and the Broncos seem to have gotten their guy because they're the first team to hire a head coach in this cycle, so they got the guy that they wanted.
Nice.
And as a Packers fan, Nick, I'd love to know your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers possibly coming here. Is it doable, and do you think it would work well here?
Well, Brian, it's not just doable, it's certainly possible. I'd say that's an upgrade, right? Doable's down here, possible's up here. I wouldn't quite go so far as to say that they are the favorites to land Aaron Rodgers should he leave Green Bay. Aaron certainly has kept his feelings mysterious as far as what he'd like to do in this offseason. If I were a betting man, which I'm not, I would say it's more likely that he leaves Green Bay than he stays there for next season, which certainly keeps the Broncos in the mix, and hiring Hackett will help. There's a reason to be hopeful in Broncos country that Aaron Rodgers may become the next Broncos quarterback. And if he does, he certainly makes you the AFC favorites to go to the Super Bowl. That's how good this guy is.
Yeah, incredible. And maybe just a few tweaks to the offense that it needs to become a true playoff contender, which it's missed out on the last few years.
Thank you, Nick. We want to bring in Broncos insider Troy Rank now. Troy, you've been following, obviously, this hiring process from the beginning. Were you surprised this morning?
Not surprised because of what happened late last night, Nicole. Dan Quinn had never scheduled a second interview here, and it became more and more curious that if Dan Quinn were still the front runner, he would have been in Denver yesterday or today. No interview was scheduled. And then a second domino fell when Byron Leftwich was negotiating to become the Jaguars head coach, and they hit a snag with the contract. So they turned to Nathaniel Hackett to say, maybe you're our guy. At that point, talks began to percolate and accelerate between George Paton and Hackett's agent. It's my understanding that late last night, somewhere between 11:30 after midnight, is when the Broncos officially offered the job to Hackett. And it helped that he had the leverage of the Jaguars. So I was not shocked, Nicole, because Dan Quinn never came in for a second interview. And once he didn't, and knowing how impressive Hackett was Monday, it began to feel like it was Hackett's job to lose, especially when the Jaguars came circling back for him. That, for me, forced Denver's hand to make this move now rather than wait till next week.
Yeah, and they didn't want to wait on Kevin O'Connell. Obviously, there were a handful of other candidates the Broncos were considering. Did Hackett just seem to have that it factor for George Paton? I mean, he's obviously a personality guy. He's set to inject a lot of life into the team.
Yeah, as we say, he can caffeinate them. I mean, they have been a decaffeinated team, franchise, organization, and most frankly, the offense for 5 years running. But what Hackett brings, according to George Paton's rubric, because this was an exhaustive search, 10 candidates over 16 days. They crisscrossed the country from Los Angeles to Green Bay to Providence. So what does Hackett bring? Well, George Paton is looking, Brian, for a coach who can inspire, who can lead, who can empower. And that is the key. He can, as Nick was saying on the earlier hit, Rothschild, someone who can lead the team, lead the room. They don't need a guy who's an expert at one thing. That was what Vic Fangio was. He was a professor at defense, but he couldn't keep his guys interested, and he paid no attention at times to the special teams and offense. That will not be the case with Nathaniel Hackett. I guarantee you that. Now, as a first-time head coach, it brings risk, of course, because you don't know what it'll be like when he's calling plays and having to be in control of the whole clock management and everything. But when you hire an offensive coach, clock management improves, because in my experience, defensive coaches only care about getting their team off the field on third down. They don't pay attention to the clock as much. Hackett will not have the clock management issues we saw from Fangio, but he also doesn't have the experience of Fangio. Fangio had 32 years in the NFL. Hackett's 42 years old. But I do think this is what they need, that young coach that gives them a chance to invigorate this franchise in a very important stage where we have a new head coach. You're going to have ownership transition here in a few months, and you're going to have a new quarterback. Other than that, not much going on.
Exactly. Yeah, not a busy time for you at all, Troy.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you, Troy. We will talk to you again here shortly.